In this video, I'm going to break down what makes a competent psychedelic guide or therapist. Hey everybody, my name is Leah Benson, and I am a licensed psychotherapist and psychedelic guide based in Tampa Bay. And for those of you trying to figure out this whole psychedelics for mental health thing, I've got some answers for you today about what makes a competent psychedelic guide and/or therapist. The first thing you want to know about a competent psychedelic guide or therapist is that they aren't necessarily the same thing. A psychedelic guide will not always be a licensed psychotherapist, although sometimes they will be. And right now, most licensed psychotherapists are not psychedelic guides. We'll get to why later. At the moment, what makes them different is pretty simple. Although it's gonna get more complicated in the next few years because in some states, they're in the process of creating legal categories for psychedelic guides who aren't licensed psychotherapists. For now though, a big difference between a psychedelic guide and a psychedelic therapist is that psychedelic guides are not usually and not necessarily licensed professionals who have gone through in-depth training in how to provide psychotherapy. And they haven't necessarily gone through training that informs them about the laws and ethics of best practice. Translation: a psychedelic guide can use whatever standards of practice that they want when they work with you. And you have no idea what those are. Maybe they're fine, maybe they're not. A licensed therapist will be abiding by a standard set of rules from their state and the ethical codes of their professional associations. Now, am I saying that an unlicensed psychedelic guide isn't a good choice? No, I'm not saying that at all. In fact, they are often not only a good choice because many are reasonable, ethical, wonderful people, they're also a good choice because lots of therapists have no psychedelic experience, and you don't really want someone who doesn't understand all the ways a psychedelic experience can unfold to be sitting with you through your psychedelic experiences. Does that mean if you have a regular therapist that you can't hang on to them if they aren't a psychedelic veteran? No, doesn't mean that, but it does mean that they need to be totally on board with your choice to expand your journey of self-awareness through the use of psychedelics. If they are, then you're probably in good hands because even though many therapists have not had mystical or transpersonal experiences through the use of psychedelics, some of them have had these types of experiences without psychedelics. Spiritual awakenings, kundalini experiences, that sort of stuff. And to be able to talk about and integrate these experiences into your daily life is a part of the competence that you'll want your psychedelic therapist to have. If your therapist can't delve into this realm comfortably though, unfortunately, you probably will need to change therapists. One thing you absolutely do need from the person sitting with you during your psychedelic experience, whether they're a guide or a therapist, is total comfort with and knowledge of, preferably through personal experience, all the different types of physical and mental phenomena that can arise during psychedelic experiences. You want that person to have not only put into perspective the intense mental aspects of their own psychedelic experiences, but you want them to have also seen and felt the complete range of physical intensity that can come from high-dose psychedelic experiences. That's because if they haven't, they could get anxious if your experience becomes physically intense, and their anxiety can rub off on you. You need your guide to provide the feeling of complete confidence and competence. And their own experiences with psychedelic intensity are what give them that confidence if the going gets rough. Now, on to the reason why most therapists are not psychedelic guides. It's pretty simple, really. Most psychedelics are illegal in most places, and therapists, on the whole, are a rule-following bunch, and they don't like to lose control. 2 strikes against psychedelics. And then even for the therapists who are interested in being psychedelic guides, they're in a pretty funny predicament. See, there are certification programs for MDMA and psilocybin mushroom guidance out there. And therapists love training and certification programs. They make us feel like we know what we're doing. And in those programs, we learn all about the ethics and legalities of best practices of being a psychedelic therapist. And that's great because that stuff's important. But guess what doesn't happen in those trainings? Therapists don't get to experience the psychedelics that they're learning about because they're illegal. So all they get to do in those trainings is watch videos of other therapists who have done the psychedelics legally for research purposes, sit and be therapeutic with people who are taking the psychedelics legally for research purposes. So how are the therapists supposed to get their psychedelic experiences? They're supposed to get them through intensified breathwork and hypnosis workshops, which don't hold a candle to the physical intensity of mental health doses of MDMA or psilocybin mushrooms. Or they're supposed to get them through ketamine therapy, which is a completely different physical experience from MDMA or psilocybin mushrooms. And I mean completely different. And then they're trained in what? Guiding people through psychedelic experiences with a substance they've never experienced before. Yeah, doesn't make much sense to me either. And that's why most therapists are not psychedelic guides. I mean, who wants to pay thousands of dollars to take a training where they don't actually gain any experience with the psychedelic they're supposed to be getting competence with? Who wants to be trained in something that puts them into a legal gray area if they do it? And who wants to know deep inside that ethically they would be portraying themselves as competent in psychedelic guidance without actually having had extensive psychedelic experience? Not most therapists that I know. And I know a lot of them. So what you see out there then is a lot of psychedelic guides who have a lot of experience with psychedelics, but no licenses or certifications to prove that they're competent, or who may or may not be competent to guide people's mental health therapy. And on the other hand, you see a bunch of therapists out there who know how to guide people's mental health, but who also know they have no business promoting themselves as if they have the experience to guide people through psychedelic experiences. And now we're back to where we started. What makes a psychedelic guide or therapist competent? And how do you find one? Competence boils down to 2 main things: an ability to help you make sense of the experiences you will have outside of the normal body-centered consciousness, which is where psychedelics take you, and an ability to tolerate and accept as normal all the ways you act when you leave your ordinary state of consciousness under the influence of the psychedelic. There are many people who can help you understand and make sense of non-body-centered consciousness. Whether you got there through psychedelics or any other self-generated deep thinking pathway, or a spiritual awakening, or a Kundalini experience. Those people might be psychedelic guides, therapists, physicists even, clergy, Eastern philosophers, or any number of other teachers, whatever they're called. They just have to be able to delve into this stuff and help you make it useful for your real life. Use whatever process you usually use to vet people that you're gonna hire to make sure they appear competent. And move on if they aren't helping you. In the world of psychotherapy, those therapists will probably call themselves transpersonal or existential therapists. They don't need to sit with you during your psychedelic experience. They just need to not be judgmental of it. As for finding practitioners who can sit with you and accept as normal and welcome all the ways you might act when you leave your ordinary state of consciousness under the influence of a psychedelic, anyone with extensive high-dose psychedelic experience will be able to do that. And any guide or therapist who has experience with physical unwinding or bioenergetic exercise, or even clergy members who are accustomed to people speaking in tongues, might be a good sitter. Although you probably don't want anyone sitting for you during your psychedelic experience unless they have experience with the particular psychedelic you are taking, just because it will make their confidence be all the better. And that's a really important feature of your sitter. And also because if they have, they will probably also be great at helping you make sense of the experience afterward. One last thing. Nowadays, you might hear the idea that unless your guide is of indigenous origin, or if they aren't incorporating authentic ceremonial practices and acknowledging the indigenous origins of those practices, they aren't competent to serve or guide you through your psychedelic experiences. Well, I beg to differ. Not that I believe you wouldn't have a profound and peak experience here or in another country with an indigenous medicine person, because I'm sure that you would. But the idea that you need to have your psychedelic medicines administered in a certain ceremonial way by an indigenous practitioner, or that your guide is not only incompetent but is grossly misappropriating something that doesn't belong to them if they're not of authentic psychedelic culture origin, is absurd. Psychedelic use has been recorded in nearly every culture all over the world for millennia. No one has a corner on the market. Now, in our culture, psychedelics have been used for around 70 years in the context of improving mental health, which isn't very long. And yes, they were introduced to us by a journalist who went to Mexico and stole them from the indigenous population. And it is important to recognize that and give attribution to the Mazatec contribution to our recent knowledge. But it doesn't mean that the way we administer and guide psychedelic experiences here in the context of mental health is wrong or incompetent. And on that note, if you're looking for legal psychedelic assistance, stateside, administered in a typically American fashion, contact me at leahbensontherapy.com to learn about the only legal, non-traditional, and gentler psychedelic, ketamine, or check out my book, The Beginner's Guide to Ketamine Therapy for Mental Health. You can find it at ketamineTherapyBook.com. Or you can visit Psychedelic Therapy Tampa to see if ketamine therapy might be right for you. See you next time.